Rebecca Cremona, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Congratulations on your film, Simshar. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Perfectly.
Tell us what your film is about.
So Simshar is actually based on two true stories. One is a Maltese fishing family that went out to sea in 2008 and ended up stranded in the middle of the Mediterranean after an accident on their boat. And this intersects with another true story of a group of refugees that were rescued between Malta and Italy. And a bit of a saga ensues when neither Malta or Italy want to take them in. They're on a Turkish boat, so that just complicates things further.
What does this film say about the current situation Malta finds itself in right now regarding refugees?
Well, it's, the migration issue, I think, is just becoming... It's not only in the Mediterranean, it's not only in Australia, it's just growing more and more, especially with the conflict in Syria. So the film is basically about just human nature and survival in general, and it just taps into the survival of a fishing family and a group of refugees and how that survival is, at the end of the day, the same, because it's about living or dying and looking for a better life. Whether it's, having a better house because you're catching more fish, or whether it's about fleeing, poverty or conflict.
Why did you make a feature film? Why didn't you make a documentary?
Well, I personally don't see myself as a documentary filmmaker. I'm very seduced by film. I think sometimes, I can't remember who said it, but they said sometimes you have to tell a lie to tell a truth. Because sometimes you have to, a story which is fiction, which is not, step by step an account of what actually happened, can bring out certain themes in a more streamlined manner maybe than how an actual thing can. That doesn't mean that I don't love documentaries, of course. It's just not where I find my calling, so to speak.
But people respond stronger to a dramatized version of real events rather than a documentary.
I think generally speaking, yes, larger masses of people do, I would say. I mean, I haven't conducted a study about, but I would say yes, because you can dictate fiction much more. You can say, look, at this point, I think this is really a really heavy scene, so I'll give some relief to the audience. Or, this is a really harsh topic, and so I want to bring in a lighter moment in this family's being. And you can dictate that, like an orchestra conductor. Also, sometimes, it's amazing. Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. So sometimes you have to downplay the truth so it's more acceptable. We had to do that sometimes, where we had, like, what happened in real life was so extreme that we're like, oh my God, that's unbelievable. Let's make it more believable by scaling it down. It's amazing how that happens.
This film appears to be quite critical of the way Malta is responding to the refugee crisis. You have the scene on the ship where there's a conflict between humane behaviour and bureaucratic behaviour. This is something that's reflected in actual policy with Malta?
Look, I think in Malta you have a very vast spectrum of how, the thoughts and the approaches to the migration issue. So, and it is a very complex issue. So what the film tries to do is to show that complexity and to show how sometimes when you think about all the complexity and all the bureaucracy that is applied to treat that complexity, sometimes we lose sight of the basic thing, which is the humane thing, So, of course, there are policies in place of why certain people should go off first as opposed to others. But at the end of the day, you are separating families sometimes by doing that. There are reasons for those policies, but it's also, there are repercussions. So what I try to do with the film is I really wanted to show that no one is entirely bad or entirely good. It is a very complex situation, and everyone is under pressure. Be it the people making the policy, being the people at the mercy of the policy.
That there's a segment in the film where I thought you had lost the plot. when they're floating around in the ocean. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking, what has this got to do with the refugee story? Then you lay it on me. So congratulations for building the tension to the point where it almost looked as though you were going off in another direction and you weren't going off in another direction. So testament to you for that.
Thank you. But, that's a point I really wanted to make, because I think sometimes I'm definitely guilty of this. Sometimes, you think your personal life is completely separate from what's going on in the bigger picture. But actually, sometimes then you realize I am influenced by what's going on. I can be an influence on what's going on, and sometimes that is going to influence me in a big way. Like, for example, people who were around during 9/11, they thought maybe that they had nothing to do with the bigger forces that came to play on that unfortunate day, but then they found themselves in the middle. In the same way, the fishing family, especially the little boy who has no idea about the political, landscape going on in the region, finds himself really, in the middle of that. And I find that very fascinating in life. And sometimes it's a beautiful thing, sometimes it's a tragic thing.
This might sound like an irrelevant question, but it's not. Are you Catholic?
Well, I'm brought up to be Catholic, yes. As in, Malta is a very Catholic country.
I know.
Yes.
But do you consider yourself a Catholic? Good Catholic girl? Good Maltese Catholic
That's such
girl?
a difficult question. Though, it's interesting because I think, again, I never thought about the Catholic thing because I was just brought up there. It's so predominant that there almost is no alternative, And then when I went to the UK to do my first degree, a friend of mine told me, "Oh my God, you're so Catholic." And it wasn't because I was praying every day or anything. It's just certain intrinsic values about everyday life and even aesthetics, even preconceived ideas about gender, about everything.
Yeah. One of the values of being Catholic is honesty. Is to be honest. Now, there appears to be a misprint in the press notes for the film where it says that you shot the movie in 29 days. How long did it actually take you to shoot this movie?
29 days.
Now, we've just established the importance of honesty in Catholicism, and you're telling me that you shot this film in 29 days. How the hell did you shoot this film in 29 days? You're not joking.
No, I'm not joking. I wish I were, but unfortunately,
how did you make that happen? Come on.
No,
I would have guessed 8 weeks.
Sweat and blood of many people,
And the coming together of forces, pulling of strings, pulling in favours.
We were on a very restricted budget, and because of that, we didn't have as much time as we should have had to make a film like this. So what we did is we put a lot of focus in the preparation. So that then, when we had those 29 days, we made sure to maximize every split second of those 29 days. And, it took so many years till we actually shot, because I had the idea for this in the Christmas of 2008, and we started shooting in 2012, end of 2012. So that's, quite a few years. So in the development, not only the actual prep before the shoot, but in the development, we were really living this. So every time, for example, the production designers were around and we'd be walking in a street, we'd be like, "Oh, this is good for that scene," So when it came to the prep, a lot of the foundation had been laid, and a lot of the key people, the cinematographers, production designers, the costume designer, they had been on board for a long time, because in order to get the financing, we had so much development work to do to pitch it. So
now, you had a lot on your shoulders making this movie, more than the burden that's usually carried.
So if I slouch, that's why you know.
I noticed the slouch. More than the burden that a first-time feature director usually carries. Tell me a bit about all the extra stuff that you were carrying on your shoulders, given that this was basically announcing to the world that Malta, as small as it is, now has a feature film industry.
Yes, well, because, Malta is used in film. Troy, Gladiator, Munich, many films have shot there, but we don't usually tell our own stories and make our own films. So this was different in that sense. So there's an infrastructure for a service industry, but not for an indigenous film industry. There are good and bad things about that, because we have a lot of skilled people who have been trained on the biggest sets ever. So that was fantastic. You know, we had a real pool of talent to draw from. Then on the other hand, there isn't an infrastructure for indigenous film. However, that is starting. The Film Fund was set up in 2008, and we're the first feature film to come out of that film fund. So there are definitely pros and cons about, you know, because if you have an established system, you can't feed into it. You know, it's not a two-way thing. It's very often it's established and you have to, you know, tap into it. Whereas if it's being established, it's a two-way thing, and you learn together and you build together.
Because you had to go to London or to LA to learn how to be a director?
Both, yeah. I went to the UK and to LA. One for my first degree and the other one for my second degree, which was great.
Is that a measure of the lack of infrastructure, the lack of local support for filmmaking that's now changed?
You know, I think film schools are very expensive. This is why you have a few around the world that are considered to be fantastic, you know, because it is an expensive medium. So, and then you have, you know, the restrictions of economies of scale. So there are pros and cons about being a small country. So at the time, there wasn't a good practical education facility for filmmaking in Malta. That too is improving, because now there is MCAST, which is a trade school, which is really, there's investment in equipment and education. Also, the status of working in the arts is improving a lot. I think there's much more respect now for people who work in the arts than there was even a decade ago.
Which way do you think the impulse is going to go with future feature films made in Malta? Will it start looking at the history, because the history is so rich, especially during the war? And very little of it is told. There's a couple of old British films that tell of the Maltese experience. Or will it go more contemporary? Or will it go both?
Well, I hope it will do both. Because I find both, you know, equally fascinating. So we'll wait and see. That's one of the pros of a budding industry. You know, it's full of excitement.
What position did you have on Munich?
I was a video assistant, which means I was responsible to wrangle the cables from the camera to the monitor of Spielberg, which was fantastic, because I was between the cinematographer and the director all the time.
I wanted to know what you learned from that shoot.
Oh, how long do you have? Because I learned so much.
Nutshell it for me.
I mean, you know, first of all, I don't even know where to start, because it was so overwhelming, you know, and that was my first real set experience. I mean, how many people are that lucky? That was being in the right place at the right time, you know, and it was really amazing, because there were some massive actors on that, two big Australian actors, Eric Bana and Jeffrey Rush. And the way Spielberg uses his cameras to tell the story, the visual storytelling is so strong over there. Also, just, you know, the professionalism in terms of the set design and the costume design and just the mechanics of how the set works. You know, I must say, like, you have to give it to them. The Americans really have the industry part of filmmaking locked down. And then you have Janusz Kaminski, who's, you know, multi-Oscar winning cinematographer who brings in the Polish touch, who is just, you know, master of light.
And what are your ambitions? What do you want to do from now on?
I would like to tell stories which I believe in, and hopefully they will be less hard to make than this one. But yes, I would like to have the opportunity basically to continue doing what I'm doing.
Are you going to stay in Malta? Are you going to...
Oh, I do. I would like to keep Malta as my base, but that doesn't mean that I have to stay there 24/7. The world is big. I want to see things.